7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the already not yet.
Thy greatest adversary. One must understand that our adversaries do not play by laws and rules. Especially our laws and rules. However, they are determined to use our rules and laws against us even as they seek to replace and impose their own versions and interpretations of them. Our adversaries seek to use us against us and others against us while creating conditions in us that mitigate our ability to push back punitively against them. Hostile goals and objectives. 1. To foster conditions to erode all areas of society from within, seeding it with the seeds of deception and destruction. 2. To cause death by 1,000 cuts. 3. To create conditions to keep us locked into our own rules and predictability while degrading us across all 7 spheres of societal influence. 4. Using the adversary's strengths against them while creating more vulnerabilities, while hitting the weaknesses and newly created ones. Unrestricted warfare, chaos warfare and corporatocratic durable disorder. 5. To wear down and wear out, breaking the will to fight against their designs. 6. Mythos projected, to create the global appearance of America and our allies being the irrational aggressor while painting themselves in false light as being the rational actor to deceive people, tribes, interests and nations. 7. Whitewash, create the appearances that they are strong and, painted black, we are weak and corrupted alongside our ideals, systems of economics and governance. They wish to convince both their citizens and ours of this. This is reality inversion, projection and perception shaping. The triggered state response modality. 1. Distort. 2. Deceive. 3. Distrust. 4. Divert. 5. Divide. 6. Degrade. 7. Dependence. 8. Devour. 9. Destroy. This is how they do it. 1. Identify strengths and use them against them by targeting them with means and methods to weaken them covertly by redirecting their strengths into traps which create and or expose their weak points. 2. Foster greed and pride and then use it against them, having lured them into a trap that makes them and their wealth, reputations and influence dependent upon you. 3. Lure into foreign traps while exposing their domestic vulnerabilities to exploitation. 4. Sow confusion in the leadership and citizenry of your targeted nation. Then create an environment conducive for political correctness. 5. Find useful idiots to use as agitators to create an environment of fear, suspicion and chaos. They will be indoctrinated with lies and mixtures of facts and fictions to whip up hatred against their unsuspecting fellow citizens. 6. Gain influence and control of thought leaders and influencers across many key organizations and in important critical educational institutions. 7. Implement a pharmaco strategy to poison citizenry with drugs to create social and health crisis using corporate interests and illicit criminal channels. The resulting cascading effects will allow you to make money on the destruction of your foes while costing them increasing amounts of money in attempting to mitigate the cascading ripple effects. 8. Poison the information and co-opt the 7 spheres of influence while gradually taking over industries and organizations with which one can solidify influence operations. Undermining the cohesion of each of the 7 spheres allows for a steady corrupting of the society at every level over time, allowing you to gain power, wealth and control over increasingly larger swaths of the private and public sector. 9. Work through proxies to fuel the fires between the divergent groups in that country with truth mixed with fiction to bring it to a boil. Spark social unrest so as to trigger blowback from the other side or sides. The more oppositional sides the better, because it is easier to use them all against one another by simple social engineering and disinformation tactics. 10. Play the wise sage or good potential ally, to gain influence over the group or groups with which you think you can manipulate the entire nation state with and can gain the most political capital from. 11. Set them up to appear complicit with unethical, illegal or plant actual compromising evidence so they cannot get out of your trap. Offer to keep it secret if they meet some predetermined set of requirements which you can use against them directly as well as their opposition could use against them, if they decide to turn against you. Or 12. Do the same with their opposition so you can play the two or more off of one another. By taking a multi-target approach where you feed all oppositional sides real and manufactured secret information on their perceived enemies, which fosters that believe your lie and make them easier to manipulate. 13. Covertly foster extremism in all the opposing groups who you then manipulate into becoming an ideological and, if need be, a militarized ones. 14. Fuel each opposing group with disinformation and false evidence which feeds their confirmation bias, reinforcing their fear and hatred of the others. 15. Manufacture events which will bring the two or more oppositional groups into a conflict zone. An example would be a protest. Embed agitators in both sides to trigger violence. 16. Use the manufactured event to create more propaganda to feed to all oppositional groups. 17. Play the false peacemaker while you extract as much information and political and economic capital as you can, using their binary opposition to one another as a cover and blame-shifting mechanism. 18. Isolate the nation from their allies and their leaders from influences which are not in line with your goals. 19. Repeat the above with increasing intensity within targets and expand to neighboring countries, using the same strategy and tactics to play them all off one another while you gain more power over all of them yet appear to be the rational peacemaker. 20. Break their next level alliances through machinations and obscuration. 21. Create a perceived threat or a final trust-breaking series of public events between those nations who were once allied with them to sow deeper divisions. 22. Feed all of them real and false information on one another until they don't know how to trust one another. 23. All the while continuing to feed each of those nation-states disinformation which exponentially increases the confusion, divisions and chaos among their people against their leaders and their leaders against their people, and divide them into every possible way against one another. 24. Bring it all to the cusp of total collapse and then step in as a benevolent helping hand to heal the wounds you created to gain the trust of them all. 25. Then make them all a proxy alliance against those who refuse to join the false construct and false peace to be used as a power block economically, politically and militarily to regain full superpower status. 26. Promote a multipolar power world to address the manufactured appearances created by the weaponized narrative which have slandered, accused and corrupted the manufactured threat. 27. Then attempt to play those other power blocks against one another, having laid the groundwork via systematic infiltration, propaganda and shows to render oppositional nations ineffective at the least to stand against the global takeover goals, and at the worst bring them to their destruction by first rotting their culture from within, weakening every structure of power in those nations, them triggering social unrest, economic instability, distrust in their government and leaders, them triggered civil wars. 28. Seed all targeted nations with ideological proxies who can act as mouthpieces, the escalation of the propaganda war. Gain influence in all 7 spheres of influence and establish weaponizable social engineering mechanisms up within networks. 29. Then lure those nations into protracted conflicts with nations you have covertly supplied weapons, technology and expertise to, which bog them down in within their own region or in multiple wars around the world, spreading out their armed forces to the point of vulnerability. 30. Then play cat and mouse military games to put more pressures on those openly and covertly targeted nations. This can provide a means of studying deployment patterns, force costly deployments, draining financial means over time, degrading and wearing down personnel and equipment. It also can provide a diversion, focusing attention away from one's domestic operations onto foreign adventures while allowing hostile forces to operate more easily in their adversaries' homelands. See the 7 spheres of influence operations. See how magicians divert the attention of an audience. 31. Covertly arm and support proxies embedded within their homeland, or in nearby nations from which they can cross the borders and infiltrate the targeted nations. 32. Degrade and destroy the will to fight within nations by use of weaponized pharmaco and a flood of disinformation and weaponized narrative strategies to poison, wear down, break physically and mentally by applying increasing societal stresses impacting health and well-being of public. These types of operations cause confusion, division and conflict within the populations of the nations, amplifying stresses and increasing tensions between various demographics, starting and fueling escalating cyclical conflict feedback loops between those various demographics. 33. Then hit them with asymmetrical cyber and terrorist-like attacks, putting both the government and the population into utter chaos, while you use more proxies like Iran and North Korea to provoke military conflict on an already stretched-out military so they are tied down, then hit the homeland with a WMD like an EMP blast or a couple of nukes using proxies. Or threaten it and capture the entire power grid and financial systems via cyber war tactics. Then you deliver your terms for that nation's surrender or total destruction. Sound familiar? It should. You are living in the middle of it. These are just the base levels of meta warfare. As it is for people, so too it is for the nation. Max DAVES.
You know, everybody's a badass. Until they realize that their mortality is on the line. What you have right now is you have a bunch of people bunch of leaders who are playing a dangerous game that they know eventually is going to kick their asses. As big as they think they are, when it comes down to it, and they have to stare into the abyss that they may wind up spending their eternities in, there's a tendency for most of them to pull back. But they're still going to play the game. You see, that is ultimately why pride leads to destruction. As they're addicts. They are addicted to their pride as much as a heroin addict is addicted to heroin. I would say even more so than a heroin addict. And just like all addicts, what it takes for them to let go of their addiction is to hit bottom and be broken. What you are seeing play out is justice. All the nations are pointing at the stuff everybody else has done to them. But no one's willing to look at the stuff that they've done to themselves. As it is for people, so too it is for nations. That is always the Achilles heel of the tyrant and the fool. The accuser and the slanderer. And they always expose themselves in all they do, making their predicament worse. It's all a giant game. So they tell themselves, until they stare at their own mortality. It's easy for leaders to send others off to war, or to send others off to die, or to put others to death while they hide in their bunkers and in their communications rooms, watching it all happen. You know, that there was a time where leaders had to actually be real leaders. They had to lead from the front, not hide in the back. That is not the system that you have. When it comes down to it, a lot of the people that pretend to have the biggest balls and the most courage are really the most fragile and the most lacking in courage. They market themselves otherwise. But when it comes down to their mortality, well, they're not so willing to meet their maker and pay the consequences for what they've chosen, because they'd rather hold on to their pride. And their pride gnaws at them like a monster chewing on what's left of the bones of prey. And it drives the tyrant and the fool to the point where they create the conditions not only for the disaster that comes on others, but also for the disaster that comes upon themselves, which they will have to answer for both. Pride blinds them to their predicament. It really just numbs them, sears their conscience so they don't feel it to some degree. And that is why being blind to it, numb to it, they go about to make the decisions, create the conditions for their own destruction. All of history is filled with ample examples of this. As for people, so too for nations. It's like I said, fear and confusion always have behind them, somewhere in the mix, pride. Either externally, forced upon others that create their fear and confusion, or within themselves and externally. Triggered responses in the flesh, your mortal coils, and in your mind. You know what sets that up? Poison. Pharmakia, the Greek word that's rendered too often as sorcery, which actually means to drug or poison, to pollute. That creates the conditions in this world for fear and confusion. psychologically, physiologically, and spiritually. It is how your systems have functioned from the very beginning, ever since the Nakash, the Beast of Beasts, conned everybody out of who they really are. So in that contextual framework, we have to look at things as they are, not as you would like them to be, and call it what it is. And what it is deception. That's why I tell you fear is false evidence appearing real. Now there is a real kind of fear, right? But even that real kind of fear, still, at some point in the human psyche and soul, is still rooted in a lie. So everybody is freaking out. Wars and rumors of wars. Everybody's playing their worldviews out, playing out their ideologies. Playing out their choices. So think about what that creates in the micros up to the macros. You're seeing it every day. You're seeing it in how you deal with one another, in your cities, in your neighborhoods, in your states, in your nations, and even in your homes. It is not what was meant to be. And so often people do things, and on one side, they blame God, but what they're really doing is exposing the fact that they're really not very good at playing God, because they're not God. They're deceived. Then you've got others that are doing things claiming that they're doing it in the name of God, when it has nothing to do with God. It's still them just pretending that it does to self-justify their own wickedness. That's the snake on the right and the snake on the left. Anywhere you go in the world. That paradigm plays out in a myriad of ways, from the micros through the macros. Everybody thinks that they're more clever than everybody else. What they are is all in the same sinking boat, heading into a tempest of their own making because of their own choices. They like their darkness. They care not for the truth. And because they care nothing for the truth, because they have chosen their lies, their choices lead them throughout their life to meet their shadow on the ground, which is exactly where the serpent was cursed, to spend all the days of its existence in the dust of the ground. Now do you understand why I continuously say, as it is for people, so too it is for nations? Who leads nations? Who makes up the nations? And when I tell you that you're in a greater war than what you can see, what you can measure, and what you can comprehend with temporal mortal things, including your own five senses and your brain, and anything that you make to augment it and extend it in the temporal, I am serious. So when I did the first part one of So You Want a War, well, what I meant by it was, do you want the kind of wars that you think about as being war? Or do you want to see the war that you're actually already in, regardless of what you see with your senses, perceive with your senses, can test and measure with your temporal things? Do you want to realize that the war that's being waged is over and for you? One side to offer you freedom, that the truth may set you free, and love, and justice and mercy from a humble and contrite heart, and the other, a perversion of all those things. So the news has been filled with wars and rumors of wars of all kinds. Are you ready to listen? Are you done with your counterfeits? Or are you going to remain wedded to your pride and your lies? And to the point where you create the war that you can understand as war, that will ultimately lead to your destruction. You see the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth playing out in worldviews and between nation states. You see it between people. One gang gets a hit, kills a gang member or a bunch of gang members from one side. The other side does the same thing, reciprocation, right? That's the law at work. That's the law at work without grace. And the law without grace demands perfection, which no one can do, which means that the wages, which the costs, right, gets paid out to those who choose that, in their own wisdom and their own righteousness, right, doing what's right in their own eyes, is death. You're armed to the teeth. All the nations are armed to the teeth. People are armed to the teeth. And people are being driven to the edge, to the abyss. From the micros through the macros. From the top down and the bottom up. Do you not understand it now? Or is your pride greater than your desire to be free from your lies and your counterfeits and be set free from the inside out? Because it is a matter of time before events become uncontrollable and a cascade effect is triggered that will create massive destruction, desolation, and death. See, when evil increases in a time, what you'll find cyclically throughout all of history is creation itself, nature itself, rebels against humanity. It's part of the checks and balances God built within nature itself. After all, He originally created human beings to be the crown of His creation, be good stewards of it, to take care of it, to take care of one another, in all truth and righteousness. But when you depart from that, when you deny that, and when you're deceived, and you go your way, the broad path, which leads to destruction, not only do you reap a harvest of destruction by your own decisions between human beings, peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations, but the creation itself wars against you. The enemy of your soul wants that. The Nakash, the ancient serpent, the red dragon, wherever you want to call it, right? The darkness, the embodiment of evil, lies, the spiritual powers and principalities of the darkness, in the darkness, use you, co-opt you, and use and co-opt everything that you build and design and create. Deceiving you, and then leading you into more fear, more confusion, which leads to diversion, division, right? Being devoured and ultimately destroyed. So when you see all the military parades from places like Iran and China and the DPRK and others, what they're relying upon is their own cleverness, what they build, what they design, what they steal from others and try to use against others. All of that testifies against them. And will ultimately lead to their destruction. Because what they are celebrating is not their strength, but their pride, their delusion, their avarice, their hubris, their darkness. They are deceived unto destruction. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Life that transcends the temporal finite, while putting the temporal finite into a context that actually makes sense of all this chaos, confusion, and insanity. It's a gift. But you see, accepting a gift is something that the prideful won't do. Their pride demands that they steal what is offered. You cannot steal the gift of salvation, and you cannot save yourselves by your pride, your lies, your fear, your confusion, your avarice, and your hubris. That's the deception, is that you can. And so you are led to your destruction, having been deceived, thinking that you are the measure of all things, thinking that your wisdom and your works and what is good in your own eyes is sufficient enough to buy you more time. All the while you know in your hearts exactly what you're doing and that it's a lie. So Russia moves their troops. Everybody else moves their troops. Iran does their thing. All the nations do their thing. Eventually, you're all going to be drawn into the same thing, and you're going to be annihilated. And then you're going to pay the price that begins after your temporal stupidity has hit the wall of reality. And you learn just how fragile your mortality really was. But that's your choice. But if they could bear their choices by choosing such stupid and idiotic paths to destruction, they wouldn't be accusers, slanderers, liars, thieves, murderers, deceivers. But that is not the case. They are exactly all those things. Now you know why it is we say where the leaders have no vision, the people perish, because the leaders lead them to their destruction. How do they do that? By doing what is right in their own eyes, their own wisdom, and their own works, in their own flesh, which is temporal. Being pawns in a greater spiritual reality, being proxies in a greater war that seeks their destruction ultimately, as well as the people they lead. So consider what I'm telling you. And let me ask you again. So you want a war? You better think through the costs of the war and wars that some want, and some think that they could play at a lower threshold and control it long enough that they can defeat their enemies without it turning on them in their pride. As it is for people, so too it is for nations.
Bellum omnium contra omnes. Today, an old philosophical tension rages in new forms between centralized institutions and decentralized tribes. These groups often hold conflicting self-interests and agendas. Centralized power seeks to preserve the existing order while consolidating influence, power, and wealth within it. Corruption and cronyism run rampant. Some decentralized tribes harbor benign motives, such as innovating or improving existing centralized systems while removing endemic corruption. Others harbor malign motives. Malicious decentralized tribes seek to destabilize the existing order and all semblance of the institutions that embody it. The goal is sometimes to replace institutions with their own. At other times, the goal is destruction without replacement, creating perpetual chaos. Malicious decentralized actors are driven by subversive ideologies, enabled by digital technologies, and empowered by weaponized narratives. They often operate through asymmetric tactics. Much of the ongoing conflict plays out in cyberspace. There, new methods of decentralization are gaining adoption, including decentralized alliances such as virtual nations, decentralized governance infrastructures such as blockchain, and decentralized economic models such as open source and black markets funded by cryptocurrencies. Despite arguments to the contrary, these innovations can displace the existing roles and functions of traditional institutions. There is a difference between possible and permissible. Many of these decentralized inventions are born of a deep-seated distrust of, or a loss of faith in, institutions. Institutions have failed, in the eyes of decentralized tribes, to deliver sustainable outcomes for all. Mistrust has given rise to a new calculus for decentralized actors. They now perceive there is less to lose by disrupting existing social, political, economic, and cultural orders than to gain by abiding within them. While centralized power maintains absolute advantages in the real world, it's failed to impose binding norms within the cyber domain, despite attempts such as the Tallinn Manual. This has led to a condition of cyber-onomy. The ancient Greek concept of onomy describes an environment of normlessness. Cyber-onomy emerged because a cyber-social contract never existed. Decentralized tribes are exploiting cyber-onomy because they perceive the social contract in the real world, enforced by institutions, to have been breached. The result is a Hobbesian cyber domain wherein we can neither expect from others nor promise to ourselves the least security. In this new world, increasingly governed only by brutal realism arising from conflicting self-interest, institutional denial of reality is futile. Inaction is ill-advised, and ignorance could mean extinction. The choice is simple: adapt or perish. This is the new strategic reality. Bellum omnium contra omnes. The war of all against all.
Already not yet.
You are in a war. There are only 3 kinds of people in a war: soldiers, prisoners, and casualties. Which one are you, and which one will you be? In this world, there are but 2 kinds of seed: the serpent seed and the good seed. Which one are you? What is your identity? Who are you? What do you base your life upon? Who do you serve? The father of lies? Or the father of lights, the truth? He who offers to you freedom and life and liberty from the inside out, and vision to see what it was that you were living in and that you are in a war against, because it is at war against you, whether anyone wants to accept that fact or not. And of course, being in a war, you've got to have great signals intelligence. Great communication networks. Hardened communication networks even. and great command and control in place to win that war. I'm looking for soldiers. I'm not here to lose war. I'm here to win this one. And I hate the father of lies and what it does to humanity, to each of us, to our friends, our family, our nations. And I will not lose, because I don't come in my own name. I come in the name of the Lord God Almighty, who is my strength, who is my fortress, who is my shield, and who is my victory, and will give us the victory over the beast of beasts and all those in league with it. So consider what I'm saying to you. This is your call up, your mobilization. Know who you are, so you know who we are. Know who you are and ask God to get you where you need to be, and trust Him to get you there, so that you are in your position in the ranks of this army. Choose this day whose army you are in. Then, when you know who you are, you'll know what your role is. Until then, you'll be wandering around in the dark, and you'll actually be impeding the very people, the very things, right, that will force us to remove you. Not because we hate you, but because we love you, and you're working against your own best interests. Not just here, but here and forevermore in eternity. Like I said, I'm looking for soldiers. And soldiers liberate others. They free others from the tyranny that held them fast. Who are you going to be? Who are you? That is your next task. Because, of course, if you don't know who you are, it's really hard to have the right intelligence in the battlefield to know what you're fighting and to make proper decisions in the battle. Consider what I'm telling you in the next few talks. Until then, check your signals. Test your signal strength. Test your networks. Test these words. Text this transmission of what I am broadcasting to you and see if it's valid. Because every one of us that are soldiers, regardless of rank in this army, all of us test our communications. And I'm not just talking about hardware and software. I'm talking about metaware. You gotta have vision to shoot straight. And that means that there are probably things you have to get cleaned out of your life so you have the vision to actually be on target. Good night.
Living the world's that loves to banter about the need for truth and filled with so many people claiming truth, yet when it's clearly laid out I see just how few people actually want to really hear it. If you want political correctness, please exit to the left. If you want religious moralizing, please step to the right. If you want relativism, read a book on Einstein, or moral rigidity, a Puritanic code. But if you want some concrete answers to troubling questions about the world we live in and why it's the way it is, then I will not shy away from earnest conversation about it.